Donald Trump is panicking as he has now trapped himself with this $1.8 billion slush fund. Sure, acting Attorney General Todd Blanche testified in Congress the other day and said, we will not be pursuing the slush fund, to which Congresswoman Meng said, well, you want to put that in writing? And then Todd Blanche was like, no, this transcript is the writing. And the Congress members like, okay, just put it in writing then. And Blanche was being all cagey, no. And they were like, well, what about the provision that says Donald Trump can't be audited again by the IRS? And you've essentially given him immunity from any type of tax liability and tax evasion that could go back decades. It could be more than $100 million. It could be billions of dollars. So are you going to get rid of that provision as well? Todd Blanche goes, oh, we haven't really discussed that yet. Okay, so he still has immunity from tax evasion, as does his family and the Trump organization. This just shows you, though, that not only is the Trump regime, Blanche, corrupt to the core, and in my opinion, exhibiting criminality to the core. I'm giving you my opinion. You could share a different opinion. That's my opinion, of course, but they're also incompetent, and they're clearly scared by what's going on in the federal court proceedings in the Southern District of Florida, where they concocted this scheme to try to use federal judge Kathleen Williams as basically their cover to make it seem like the judge blessed this settlement agreement arising out of Donald Trump's ridiculously frivolous $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS and the Treasury Department, where he alleged, oh, in 2019, that horrible administration leaked my tax records and 450,000 other people's tax records. What a horrible administration back in 2019. Yeah, that was your administration. The contractor worked for your IRS. The claim was time barred. It's utterly frivolous. If it wasn't frivolous and wasn't time barred, the max damages you could get is $1,000. But then you used that case, dismissed it after federal judge Kathleen Williams wanted to inquire further into whether this was a collusive and unlawful settlement. Then you separately announced this $1.8 billion slush fund and the waiver of your tax liability, but then you plastered the case and the judge's name as though this settlement arose out of the judge's case. Remember, 35 retired federal judges went to Judge Kathleen Williams and they were like, hello, there's something called Rule 60, Judge Williams, where you can reopen this case and conduct an inquiry into whether your court was used for fraud in inducing this unlawful settlement. So even though Todd Blanche announced to Congress, we're not doing the slush fund, it does still seem like you're waiving Trump's tax liability. You're the guy's personal criminal defense lawyer and you're waiving his tax liability. But it seems that what they're going to argue is, well, now all of these issues are moot, Judge Williams, so you shouldn't even inquire into what happened with this settlement or what went down in this case where Trump sued Trump government for $10 billion, then used your name to enter this. It's moot, right? Let's just walk away from it. As I said, Donald Trump's big play here actually wasn't the $1.8 billion slush fund. I thought that was fungible. Remember what I told you? I said, focus on the tax waiver, because it's not the tax liability waiver, because it's not just the $100 million to me that was being fought regarding Trump's past taxes. The way the waiver was written, in my opinion, waived all tax liability up to the time of the settlement agreement, which to me means all of these shady deals, the purported capital gains on the 3,800 stock trades that he's been doing in the White House, the quid pro quos with UAE and the Saudis and Qatar, the crypto stuff. To me, he would argue, well, the waiver included all of the conduct that preceded the tax liabilities that preceded it. So in my view, if you say, okay, Trump made $4 to $5 billion already, just take 25% and use the lower tax bracket of the capital gains here, then in my view, Trump could actually have been waving away $1 billion in tax liability for himself. And because what's his incentive to pay the taxes if he says he has no liability for not paying taxes from the point of the agreement going back? So don't be fooled when they said, well, if he does more tax liability in the future, that's not what the agreement says. Yeah, well, the way it's written was all of this $1 billion grift that took place before the midterms may be impacted. And so I think Judge Kathleen Williams, though, is going to be still pissed and says, I know what you're doing. She's expecting that they're going to write the motion, right, Harry? I wouldn't be shocked. Right, Harry, I'm speaking to myself. Let's bring in Harry Litman from the Talking Feds YouTube channel.
Right, Ben.
Talking Feds. Right, Harry? Harry, and the point, she knows what the hustle is right now. And I 100%. Think any moment now she expects like we expect, Trump's going to file notice of mootness or some document like that and say, actually, it should just be dismissed. The slush fund doesn't exist. And I think Kathleen Williams says, no, you stepped into my court. You wanted me to have jurisdiction. You used and abused this court and the name of the chambers here. And so, no, I still want to know what the hell happened here. And so perhaps Trump realizes that she'll do that. Maybe this is some argument to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals or to the Supreme Court. Maybe they'll just say, all right, let's let bygones be bygones. Right. But, Harry, this was Trump trapping himself in something that I think he overthought his ability just to do anything. And it does seem, at least on the outer perimeters, that's a phrasing that judges like to use. On the outer perimeters, he got slapped down in a big way here.
Yeah. Overthought, not a phrase we normally associate with Donald Trump, but it doesn't matter. Somebody did get way, way, way too cute. And you're 100% right. Let's just first start with, we will not be pursuing. What the hell does that mean, especially coming from this Department of Justice, from the head lawyer in this Department of Justice? To me, it sure doesn't mean it's finished and done and it'll never be dusted off, et cetera. It looks a few inches ahead of saying we'll obey the court order. We will not be pursuing, among other things. They could always say, yeah, and now we will be pursuing. The second point I wanted to raise with it is the DOJ supposedly entered into this settlement. And if it were a real controversy and they entered into a settlement, the person they settled with would say, whoa, wait a second. This is binding and I have a right to it, so that they're not even thinking, but it proves the point. If Todd Blanche can go up and say, never mind, it really demonstrates that, of course, the whole thing is collusive. Normally, if you actually traded value for value, the person you settled with would say, what the hell are you talking about? We entered into an agreement and I want you to adhere to that agreement. Now, on to Judge Williams. And I had maybe you can, if you care to, can link the Substack I published yesterday, but it was half about this in Judge Williams. 100% clear. This is going to be the department trying to wriggle out. It's the very reason that they did this phony baloney voluntary settlement before they'd even entered an appearance in the case. It was because it was 2 days before they had to file a brief saying either, yeah, whatever Trump says goes, meaning it's not unconstitutional, or no, we're really adverse, which would be a blatant lie. Williams wants to know, not are they going to put it into effect? Williams wants to know, and she makes that clear in her order, was there a fraud on the court? And that absolutely remains live, and the possibility, imagine for a moment that she finds that there were a fraud on the court. There'd be some splaining to do and some sanctions to hand out and a possible finding to make. And none of that is kind of taken out of play because Todd Blanche says we won't be pursuing it. Not to mention, of course, the elephant in the room of these tax audits on that. Remember, we've had one real look into Trump's taxes. And what did they show? That way back when he took a very questionable, humongous loss. And based on that, he wasn't paying. He paid barely a nickel of taxes for years and years. You can only imagine what the current record holds, particularly with the what people have who really know the picture have said, maybe billions of dollars in emolument clause violations. That's a lot of taxes. That's where the real money is for Donald Trump. So, in many ways, it's completely inadequate. And I think you may even find people we'll see whether the Republicans on the Hill who were revolting say, okay, that's all right, you won't be pursuing. But anybody who knows Trump and this administration, you wouldn't trust them anyway. But here they've said very little. And what they have said has nothing to do, really nothing to do with the fraud that may have been perpetrated on the court, on Judge Williams, on the federal judiciary. She has the power not to unwind the settlement, which they say they're not pursuing. She has the power to make life difficult for Boris Epstein, Trump's lawyer, for Stanley Woodward, the third ranking official in the DOJ who signed the settlement agreement. And that there is, I think, going to be a showdown come the 12th, a week from Friday, which is when these briefs are due. They're going to try to say, kind of similar to what they tried to say in the Abrego Garcia case way back in May of 2025. Oh, tish tosh, nothing to worry about now. I'm sorry. If the Department of Justice colluded with the President of the United States to perpetrate a fraud on a federal court, that's something to worry about, whether or not they say, oops, never mind about the actual corpus of the settlement.
Everybody, make sure you subscribe to Harry Litman's YouTube channel. It's called Talking Feds. Subscribe to his podcast, the Talking Feds podcast, and subscribe to his Substack as well. Harry, thanks for the analysis. And of course, we're going to be following what's happening in that case before Judge Kathleen Williams. Everybody, stay tuned. This is not anywhere near over. There's a lot more questions that need to be answered, but don't you worry. Harry and I will be combining our experience, and we will be keeping you updated every step of the way. Thanks. Make sure you subscribe to Harry's YouTube channel and subscribe right here on the MeidasTouch YouTube channel as well.
Thank you.
New Meidas merch. Head to store.meidastouch.com today and get yourself the best pro-democracy gear and show your support. That's store.meidastouch.com.